Preaching to the Nocoiners, Bitcoin Tech Talk, issue number 255. As always, you can find my newsletter on jimmysong.substack.com. It comes in every Monday morning, as it does like days like today. The hero's journey for every Bitcoiner follows a certain arc. You learn about it, then go down the path of trying to figure out how to get it, maybe take some detours in trying to mine it or trade it. If you're reading this newsletter, you're probably near the end of the journey, where you've become convinced of the value of Bitcoin and are now trying to convince your loved ones about its usefulness. I've been in Bitcoin since 2011, and I've been talking to people about Bitcoin the entire time. And what follows is just a little bit of the social strategy that I found regarding convincing people. As much as we like to think that we're special and that we can get our loved ones to stack through our force of will, that's generally not the case. Though if it is the case for you, you should really look into a career in sales. We love our friends and family, but orange pilling is often not that simple, and for many, a long and difficult road. I still remember telling my parents and sister about Bitcoin in 2013 when Bitcoin was $80. I told them to buy some, even if they didn't understand it, just in case. They didn't listen. I also told my friends on Facebook to look at it. To my knowledge, none of them bought, and several warned me that it was a scam. But the only person that listened was my mother-in-law, not having great command of English as an immigrant, didn't exactly have the best deal flow. My point here is that most people are resistant to Bitcoin when they first hear about it because they don't understand it. The few people that do listen and buy are doing so because they trust you and your judgment. And though we'd like to think that we have massive credibility with our friends and family to get them to invest in what we think is best for them, most people simply don't trust others with their financial decisions. In other words, preaching doesn't usually work, and people's natural defenses go up very quickly. This is because preaching is how a lot of hucksters work, and they tend to emphasize doing things in a hurry. In a sense, preaching is a very high time preference method of convincing someone. What works much better is to let people know that you are into Bitcoin and leave it at that. What I found is that after a while, usually a period of 2 to 5 years, those that are curious will either buy on their own or come back to ask some questions. It's well known in sales that you need to expose someone to an idea 7 times before they really investigate it. That's the cognitive hurdle that we have to overcome, and it can't all come from the same source. Those exposures take time, and if there's anything that helps you on convincing someone in Bitcoin, it's time. Bitcoin makes the news during bull runs, and that's typically when you'll get a lot of questions from your friends and family. And really, this is the best thing for both Bitcoin and your relationship with that person. Leaving them alone to explore it themselves and only giving them guidance when asked is the best strategy. Bitcoin's number go up technology definitely helps here, as the returns are undeniable and most people get a sense of regret at not being more curious when they first heard about it. This should increase your credibility with your loved ones in the long run. The overwhelming evidence of its success, in other words, is the ultimate low time preference convincer. So I wrote this article as sort of a reflection on a lot of the people that I've tried to convince with Bitcoin. Generally, I have not been successful, and this is the common theme with most people, is that they're not very good at convincing people. What does work, though, is sort of identifying yourself as a Bitcoiner and just sort of leaving it at that. You don't need to convince people or to defend it every time it comes up or whatever, because in a sense, having Bitcoin is enough, and you'll be proven right regardless. And they might want to denigrate it or whatever, but ultimately it's all about Bitcoin itself. It's going to do well on its own, and that's what's ultimately going to get people curious and asking you about it. You can definitely nudge them if they're curious, but without that curiosity, it doesn't make any sense. All right, let's talk about Bitcoin. Bit174.org is a tool to parse and explore PSBTs. PSBTs are a bit tricky to debug, and this is an excellent tool for users and wallet developers to figure out what's wrong. The tool takes the base 64 encoded PSBT and parses them into inputs, outputs, and so on. As parsing base 64 is very difficult versus hexadecimal, this tool helps in figuring out where the PSBT is doing something wrong. The really nice feature is that you can add or delete parts of the PSBT, and the base 64 PSBT automatically adjusts. So I found this tool to be extremely useful, especially if you're working with PSBTs and if you're a wallet developer or something like that. PSBTs are becoming a much bigger standard, and debugging it and making sure that everything's working properly is not easy. And you either have to make your own tools or use a tool like this one. So I would recommend trying it and certainly playing with it. Yak Shaver explains how AnyPrevOut APO enables L2. L2 allows for multi-party Lightning channels and removes some of the attack surface of current Lightning channels. The main thrust of the article is that we need some way to authorize not just a specific previous output, but any previous output that has the same public key. The tutorial is great for getting an idea on where the challenge with APO is. The on-chain discount and security simplicity that comes with L2 make this a compelling next soft work. So a lot of people don't really understand what L2 is, and to be quite frank with you, it took me a while to learn that, and I had to read the white paper several times and so on. But basically, it's a multi-channel Lightning, and it removes this asymmetric secret keeping that needs to happen on any channel. So if I open a channel with somebody, I keep some secrets that if my counterparty finds out, then they may be able to drain me of some money and so on. With L2, it's completely symmetric. You don't need to hide secrets other than your private key, of course, from the other counterparty. So from a security standpoint, it's a big upgrade. From a feature standpoint, you get multi-party channels. So you can replace a particular input with a previous one and so on. So it makes for sequencing really cool. I believe you need to use the lock time field for the actual sequencing, which is a little bit ironic, but that's what L2 does, and that's why we need AnyPrevOut, because you need to be able to change the actual input that was being signed. And with APO, you can have something like L2, which can have more than two parties in a Lightning channel, which would be really cool and allow for a lot better liquidity and so on. Camouflage is a list of issues related to enhancing privacy in the various Bitcoin projects. For privacy advocates, this is a list to watch as it offers progress updates of various tools. I would love to see them incorporate bounties on some of these issues eventually. So I believe they're tracking 3, BISC, Bitcoin Core, and LND. But basically, they're looking at all of the GitHub issues and just sort of listing them. So issues and pull requests, I think, are the two things. If you're really serious about privacy and like want to know what's going on and trying to encourage certain innovations and so on, this would be the page to go. And if they had a bounty program or something, I think that would be really awesome as well. All right, Mike, let's talk about Lightning now. Michael Ree gives a crash course on Lightning app development. The tutorial mimics his journey into developing for the Lightning ecosystem and makes heavy use of Polar and LND. For developers wanting to play around with Lightning to see what it can do, this is a great way to experiment. Now, if only Replit would make something like this available. So Michael Ree basically decided, hey, this is so interesting and I want to get into it. He ended up using Polar, and the Medium post goes through exactly what he did. And it's kind of really cool. I just wish it were on Replit because I really like that platform for just sort of bootstrapping something really quickly and so on. Collider writes about the benefits of the Lightning Network for traders. The article explains a lot of the things that traders care about, like perpetual futures, funding rates, and arbitrage trades. The main argument is that most of these trades require fast execution, which are hampered by on-chain transactions, but can be made much faster and more securely with Lightning. As traders are big players in the Bitcoin ecosystem, don't be surprised if their needs end up driving a lot of innovation in Lightning. So I learned quite a bit on like how perpetual futures work on this article, and basically how BitMEX works and the funding rates on both sides, and how the perpetual future is essentially pegged to the underlying and so on. But the main point there is that the speed of execution allows for better arbitrage trades, which essentially keeps the prices the same between exchanges and so on. So I think ultimately that level of arbitrage available is good for everyone. And once you have something like Lightning and sort of fat channels going back and forth between a particular exchange and a trader, that this could be a really big thing. What would be ideal is if you can go from exchange to exchange really quickly, and then arb out any opportunities, and that way everyone pays essentially the same price, and you don't have crazy fluctuations or differences between two exchanges when there's no liquidity between them. Substack is allowing receiving of Lightning payments for newsletters on their platforms. As pointed out in the article, 2 of the top 5 money-making newsletters are about Bitcoin, which makes me wonder, should I be creating a premium version of this newsletter? Please leave comments or reply to the email if you have an opinion. So it's a really interesting thing. It's being enabled by a company called OpenNode. And basically, a Substack does allow like paid subscriptions and so on. And I think, I don't know, Pomp's newsletter and maybe Dan Held's newsletter or something like that. They're 2 of the top 5. Maybe there's a trader in there as well. But they're making, it's a big part of the Substack ecosystem. So they're allowing for Lightning payments. I haven't charged for this newsletter or any of my content really, just my books and stuff. And a lot of that is available for free as well. But I've been doing that for a while, and I'm curious about maybe charging a little bit and seeing where that goes, because I think there is a sacredness to monetary transactions, and if you get something for free, then you can't really complain. But if money is being exchanged, then there's a real obligation on both sides and so on. So there is something to that, and I'm at least contemplating it. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it'll be like every other week for normal, and then you get it every week if you're subscribed, something like that. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Cryptode is an index of interesting Lightning projects. I was floored by the sheer number of projects on there, many of which I hadn't heard before. I've noticed a huge uptick in Lightning usage, and for myself, I'm finding that I'm doing roughly 20 times the Lightning transactions as I am on-chain transactions. I imagine this will only go up over time, and that would mean hypergrowth for such projects. So the growth of Lightning, I think, really hit me in the face when I went to BitBlockBoom, because at BitBlockBoom, I was selling my books and so on. A bunch of people paid me in cash, and other people paid me with Cash or Venmo, or Cash App or Venmo. But the people that paid in Bitcoin, they all use Lightning. They all had Lightning wallets. It's amazing the penetration that Lightning wallets have had. And basically, I didn't take a single on-chain transaction for my books. I ended up converting some of the cash into Bitcoin, and one of those transactions ended up being on-chain. But the rest of it just ended up just being on Lightning. It's pretty awesome. Like you get it right away, and you don't have to wait and whatever. So I found it was it's really kind of hitting its moment right now, and the number of apps that are coming on and so on is really kind of making it really enjoyable to use this, and we're like right at the cusp of some serious adoption, and I could feel it happening in the community. But yeah, I mean, regardless, it's kind of cool to see all these different Lightning projects, and I can only imagine they'll go up over time, because like Lightning users are sorely underserved. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of channels open and so on. They don't have that much to do other than like route payments and stuff. So any sort of game or entertainment or goods or services that you can get for Lightning, they're going to find a pretty receptive audience. So I would encourage anyone that's working on these to keep going and see where it takes you. All right, economics, engineering, etc. Alex Gladstein has a powerful interview with Roya Mahboob about her experience with Bitcoin and Afghanistan. This is a long read and shows just how powerful Bitcoin can be in places like Afghanistan, which currently lack banking services. The article shows some of the pitfalls of Bitcoin, like the perception that it's gambling or scammy, but also goes through some of the triumphs, like the Afghan women that were able to take their wealth with them when escaping abroad. I found it surprising that, adjusted for purchasing power and internet penetration, Afghanistan is seventh in peer to peer exchange volume, suggesting that, much like El Salvador, people without banking services are using Bitcoin. It will be interesting to watch Bitcoin's development in this country as the years progress. So, really powerful story. There's a story of some of the women that Mabu paid about in Bitcoin and how they were able to leave and use some of the money once they arrived at a different country to start their own life and stuff. It's just a really powerful story about how Bitcoin can change lives. Now, unfortunately, a lot of Afghanistan wasn't into Bitcoin in 2013, but the few people that were have benefited greatly. And I imagine it will be the case going forward. And there is a market for Bitcoin, even in places like Afghanistan. Apparently, there's a lot of people buying it, as a way to store their value. They need banking services. So it'll be very interesting to watch, how it develops in sort of distressed places like Afghanistan and go from there. Robert Breedlove argues that Bitcoin is a way to limit war. The article focuses on what we really mean by property and how war is really a way to resolve property disputes. Property with clear edges makes for less disputes, and property that's hard to seize also make for less disputes. As Breedlove points out, Bitcoin is property that's very hard to seize or take, even with massive violence. I have some more thoughts on this that will be on Robert's podcast soon. So just so you know, Robert and I did record a pretty long podcast. I think we have 6 hours worth of content that he'll be releasing at some point. But a lot of what we discussed was war, and sort of having good boundaries around property tend to be the clearest way and the most efficient way in which we can interact with each other. And it takes away a lot of conflict and so on. And his argument in that article is really about war being a way to settle property disputes. And I think there's definitely something to that. And limiting those is a big part of what Bitcoin accomplishes, because the property boundaries around Bitcoin are just so absolutely clear and spelled out and so on. The IMF has printed a bunch more money called special drawing rights. SDRs are IMF's fiat money that are only used by central banks. Not many people know about these, but they play a significant role in the world economy. As with all central bank monetary expansion, this sort of action is at best a redistribution and at worst straight theft. So it's crazy that they're able to just print another $650 billion worth of SDRs. And some central banks, like Canada's, for example, take them as their reserve. And these are supposedly backed by a basket of currencies and so on. But really, it's just sort of the IMF getting to print money. And originally, with Bretton Woods and so on, they were going to do something like that. World Bank came out of Bretton Woods as well, but neither of those organizations have anything like what they were intended for. Instead, they're being used by those in power to basically monetarily control others. Speaking of inflation, this essay looks at the link between monetary inflation and verbal inflation. The author compares academic credibility with monetary credibility and concludes that just as monetary credibility is lost through hyperinflation, a similar thing is happening with academic credibility. The result is that most people are largely discounting whatever the official narrative is on anything, and thus much more skeptical in general. I suspect verbal inflation, much like monetary inflation, will be a big underlying driver of Bitcoin adoption in the years ahead. So go read the article. I thought the conceptual framework around there was absolutely brilliant. There is sort of like a verbal inflation where everyone is sort of trying to outdo each other to get attention and so on. And, there's no real credibility in a lot of different things now. Turns out a lot of academic studies are unreproducible. These are sort of like the cracks around, academic credibility. It's very similar to how monetary credibility works. To a large extent, monetary credibility is still there for the dollar. But during a time of hyperinflation, that would go away. And the author concludes that there's, this is happening with, verbal inflation, that expertise isn't necessarily like that credible anymore because they're saying just more and more outlandish things. Jack Dorsey wants to build a decentralized exchange. The idea seems to be to make each individual able to run a mini exchange. This is the right idea of decentralization, where each user is running their own server. I can imagine an Umbral, Start9, Mindown, BTC having the option to host an exchange where you trade BTC for Liquid Tether or something similar. That's probably not what they're thinking, as the details haven't been revealed yet, but I would like to see something like that develop. So for actual decentralization, you need each individual to run a server. And if you have that, say, over the Lightning Network, and you're able to put out asks and bids in some sort of like semi-binding way, so you can't just like flood it with fake bids or fake asks or something like that, then that would work. Unfortunately, like that's a lot of design work that needs to go into an actual decentralized exchange. Maybe there's a way to do it where you post some collateral, and in order to be able to put asks and bids into the network, and it's your job to like collate them and relay them and gather them and figure out if it's something that you want. I imagine something like that would ultimately be the way to do it, and having multiple different nodes that just collect all of these and push them out, and figure out which ones are actually more credible or not, and which ones are back with a bond or something like that. That would be the way to make it. I'm not sure if that's what they're thinking, but that's what I would like to see. All right, some quick hits. Sweden made the mistake of denominating dollar amounts, not Bitcoin amounts. So this is a story of a thief that stole something and had to remunerate in Bitcoin, and basically held some Bitcoin. They valued it in dollars, and Bitcoin's gone up in the time that this prisoner hasn't had access to the Bitcoin. So Sweden basically was forced to give the thief the difference. So kind of interesting. Basically, you want to be on a Bitcoin standard there and not the dollar standard. Let's see. Cuba recognizes Bitcoin. Cuba looks like they're kind of following El Salvador. I'm not sure exactly what they're thinking, but I do suspect that there's a lot more Bitcoin activity than we know about in Cuba, and they're recognizing that it's actually bringing wealth into the country, which they desperately need. Blockstream raised $210 million at a $3.2 billion valuation. So this was some big news, at least from a financial standpoint. It looks like they're going to get into some capital-heavy industries like ASIC miners and energy things and so on. But it's going to require some capital expenditure, so it makes sense that they're raising a lot of capital. Another week, another poorly engineered coin forks unexpectedly. This one was, of course, Ethereum, and is it really any surprise? There's a thread on exactly what happened on Twitter and so on, but I've been warning you about this for years. All right, some events. There's an online Christian conference that I've recorded a video for called Faith Driven Investor. That's on September 8th and 9th. I will be in Miami for the Oslo Freedom Forum, October 3rd through 6th, and Atlanta for TabConf on November 4th and 5th. Unfortunately, I had to cancel the UK event as there's a 10-day quarantine required. The programming blockchain seminar is therefore no longer going to be in the UK, but will be in Atlanta, Georgia on November 2nd and 3rd. It's a 2-day seminar for programmers to learn about Bitcoin, and you can apply. And I also have some scholarships available for those that can't afford it. All right, so some podcasts, etc. On this week's Bitcoin Fixes This, I took some listener questions. This ranged from my thoughts on war to Christian books I like. So, I didn't have a guest this week. I will have one this week, but didn't have one last week, so I took listener questions. Turned out it was like really fun. There was a ton of people that were asking different questions about all sorts of things, and I don't know, those seemed pretty fun to me. I might do them a little more regularly. I read through last week's newsletter, which you can find here. I talked about the new book with Ashton Cohen. So that was a fun interview. I recorded a ton, but they're getting released over a period of weeks, and some weeks I get like 5, and Other weeks I get none, and so it varies. But that was the only one that released this week. I didn't do any shows with Tone or anything, but yeah, hopefully, it's a fun one to listen to. All right, my other books are the Little Bitcoin book and Programming Bitcoin, which you can find on Amazon. Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this newsletter. I'm an advisor and proud to be a part of a company that's enhancing security for Bitcoin holders. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or Bitcoin native financial services, learn more at unchained.com. Fiat Delenda Est, this song is done.